It's the Line Makers on Sporting News.
All right, folks, let's step back for just a moment and have some fun. It's another edition of the History of Sports Betting. Brian Blessing for the Line Makers on Sporting News with the man, Mr. Jimmy Vaccaro, a Las Vegas legend. He's the Director of Public Relations for William Hill North America. And we love these articles you're writing, Jimmy, taking us back to a different time, a quieter time, a fonder time. It's a different world these days. But we're going way back to the beginning with you. And we're talking about publications. And when you were a teenager, you were a passenger and went and start finding these things.
Well, naturally, I call that the golden age. I mean, it's a time where obviously we went from where we were, obviously, to people like Charlie McNeil, who gave us the point spread. Then the next level was like in the early 50s, like, how was this stuff disseminated? Obviously, it had to read something somewhere. So that's when a guy named Leo Hirschfeld started what they called the Minneapolis Line. He had a young whippersnapper working for him at the time. His name was Mort Olsson. I don't think I need to tell anybody out there who Mort Olsson was. Mort, in 1957, left the Minneapolis Line, started what he called the green sheet. But somebody upstairs, his wife, said, don't like the green sheet, let's call it the gold sheet. I think that name stuck, didn't it?
It stuck, and it stands today. Our good friend Bruce Marshall actively involved with that. But this was a publication that wasn't only for the players. Some of the big names in the industry started reading this thing closely too.
No doubt. And like I said, even as a kid, I remember my brother driving to a few places around the Pittsburgh area where you could actually get the gold sheet. It wasn't available on the internet. It wasn't available readily like it is today. So
the internet wasn't available.
You had to find it. And so our place was the Comet News in Braddock, Pennsylvania. When I got my little hands on that thing, I couldn't let it go. It was a weekly thing where my brother, who would take me down there, and I would look, I would read. They had an opinions, they had content, they had the things like which started to where it is today, but they actually started it way back when. You could form an opinion, you could see things. It brought you to the realm of, like, you know, this stuff is fun, it's exciting, it's romantic, and it was there. So Mort Olsson had a lot to do of what we're doing today. The gold sheet, the gold standard, I loved it. And yes, then the wise guys started to get also.
Yeah, bring it to Vegas. Bring it to Vegas, where some of the biggest names in the industry out here. When you got out here, and you said a young whippersnapper, and I love the line, said, you can learn a lot if you keep your mouth shut.
Yeah, and I did that pretty good. I kept my mouth shut a lot, but, you know, hanging around people like Bob Martin, I mean, just right there, it was like going to Harvard and getting a BA. Just a little slight things that he would say. Just a little slight thing that was like, you know, Jimmy, here's a reference point. And then you took it on your own and went from there. You stopped in Churchill Downs with the famous Harry Gordon. You stopped in the Stardust, naturally, Lefty Rosenthal was there. Then you put the two together. You talked to people who understood it. And then you went and you got the gold sheet, or you went to some other publication, and you obviously created your own way of doing business. It went a long way to where we are today, but I'm glad I was a whippersnapper at that time, gathering up all this info.
And as we kind of wrap this edition of the History of Sports Betting up, it goes full circle, and more accepted behavior now, and for us to be sitting here with a forum like Sporting News to be openly talking about this, and let there's an appetite for it. There's no doubt about that.
It surely is. We actually went from the minor leagues to the major leagues, you know, hooking up with Sporting News. They've been around 125 years, which makes them only 8 years older than you.
Nice. Yeah, well, my social security number is 4. So that ought to tell you something. He's the man, Mr. Jimmy Vaccaro. He'll be back with us next week. We'll have another edition of the History of Sports Betting right here, the Line Makers on Sporting News.